waiting to hear him talk.
Right, we're just gone live, David. So, good evening and welcome to our latest webinar on food safety culture. And our guest speaker tonight is Jude Hutchinson. So, would you like to just tell us a little bit about who you are, Jude, and what you do?
Yes, hello, I'm one of the directors at HSF Training. We're based in Sunderland in the northeast of England. I work mainly with food manufacturing, but the other side of what I do is I obviously train and I develop some of the qualifications and content for one of the awarding bodies.
Okay, that's fine. And also joining us tonight is Mark Williams. Mark,
hello. Yes, hello. My name is Mark Williams. I'm an environmental health consultant and I specialise in housing. And good evening to everyone.
Right, thank you. David. David, can you hear me? Well, that's David Newsom. I don't know that he can hear us at the moment, but I'm sure he will join us when he can. We'll have to take it from there. Okay, Judith, I'm going to put your slideshow up there, so if you'd like to talk us through it.
Yes, obviously we're going to talk about food safety culture today, which is fairly topical at the moment, and so there's a lot of training courses, a lot of interest in it, and food standards agency, have developed a course, and so we thought it'd be a useful thing to have a look at. Food safety culture is something which is being talked about a lot, as I say, at the moment. Inspectors are being asked to look at the culture of the business. It's nothing new, though. I think we talk about food safety culture as if it's something new, but culture in any business is fairly important. So I'm going to look today not so much at the theory behind it, but really what a business might be able to do to actually improve their food safety culture. It's a great big subject. There's lots of people, so we can only really touch on it. So a quick presentation and then we'll have a quick chat.
Okay. Can I just check, Jude, that you can see the PowerPoint on the screen?
I can now.
All right.
So the overview of what we're going to do, we're going to look at why everyone's talking about food safety culture, who's responsible for having a good food safety culture. We're going to look at different layers of food safety culture that a business might have, and then just put some practical ideas together to improve things. First of all, just so that we don't get any issues with any plagiarism or anything like that, a lot of what I'm going to say isn't my ideas. I'm going to reference them through when necessary, but there are lots of information. Some of it's Food Standards Agency information we've used on this presentation, stuff from Professor Chris Griffiths, who's done a lot of work with regards to that. We've linked it to Health and Safety, HSG 65, and various papers, etc. So, you know, and then slotted in a few of my own beliefs as well. Okay, so just to make sure nobody sort of says, oh, hold on, you've pinched our stuff. I thought we'd better reference it. Let me turn on to the next slide. So what is food safety culture? Well, Professor Chris Griffiths, sorry, can we go back one? Yeah, that's lovely, thank you. Professor Chris Griffiths has identified it as being shared beliefs, attitudes, values contributing to hygienic behaviours in a food handling environment. And Frank Yanis from Walmart, who's written a book about food safety culture as well, has called it what the employees in an organisation or business think about food safety. It's the food safety behaviours that they routinely practice and demonstrate. So, if you like, it's the soft skills. It's not a definite following of a legislation or anything like that. It's the attitudes and beliefs, which are always harder, I think, to measure, and they're always harder to change sometimes. Then you can tell somebody to do something, but it doesn't always work. Lately, some things that have been in the news. In 2009, this is one of the first things that was mentioned about culture, and this was regards to the second Pennington report with regards to the E. coli outbreak in South Wales, and that was a little bit about the culture of the business, one of little regard. And then even more recently, in the Elliott Review, with regards to the Horsegate scandal, if you like, when he was looking into food fraud, he actually mentioned that we need a culture within business involved in supplying food, focusing on depriving those who seek to deceive consumers. Basically, what he's saying is that it's not just the food industry that needs to look at it, the consumers as well, and the enforcers, etc., all need to look at things as well. Can we turn over the next one, please? So who's responsible for it? We like to make sure that it's always going to be businesses. So yes, the food business has a responsibility, but I think quite interestingly, especially Chris Griffiths has mentioned that he really thinks that it's more than just the business. Legislation and enforcement should look at culture and put in sensible legislation that's perhaps science-based and has some reasoning, instead of allowing lots and lots of red tape that perhaps people are doing that doesn't matter. So they have perhaps some responsibility as well. The consumers themselves, at the end of the day, if we're going to buy food that's really, really cheap, the chances are there is a problem. If we're demanding stuff for nothing, then we can't expect standards to be really, really high. So I think there's something to do with the consumers themselves actually looking and thinking, well, is it going to be safe, not just is it cheap? So I think there's some of that. Governments with their policies on buying cheap food, the way they market food, the way food is sold as a commodity, perhaps they need to be looking at things like that. And then trainers. I think there'll probably be a lot of trainers watching this, but I think the trainers have a responsibility to a point. Traditionally, food safety training's about just giving out ritualistic information sometimes. So I think really we have a look at trying to do the culture and giving people reasons why as well. So the next slide I'm going to look at, if we can look at the next slide, is a little bit about the Food Standards Agency. They've done a little bit of work recently, and they commissioned a cultural assessment toolbox, which they are encouraging all enforcers to have a look at and gauge the culture of the business. So as well as, are the floors clean, are the walls clean, have they got a food safety management system, it's a bit more than that. It's, do they use it, what's the belief in the business, etc. They've split it into, at the end of the assessment, you fall into 5 different categories. You're either a calculated non-complier, which means you're deliberately breaking the rules. You're a doubting non-complier, which means you do follow the rules. Well, you don't really follow the rules, but you don't really see why you should. It's not that you're deliberately fraudulent, you're just not seeing what you're doing. Then we have dependent compliers. Compliers, they're people who are complying, but only because they have to. The proactive compliers, people who want to try and do it. And then the real leaders who are a bit more innovative. I really don't want to spend too much on that, because it's a toolbox that they're using to assess food safety culture as opposed to putting information in. Moving on to the next slide then. Layers of food safety culture, or levels. Chris Griffiths talks about 3 levels, and there's lots of other people within business who talk about culture within business, within any business, whether it's food or not. So we've got the outer level, or surface level, and this is the things that you see. And it'll be all the slogans, the food safety champions that people might have. It's all the visible things. It's the colour-coded chopping boards, and isn't that wonderful? And it's about having artifacts, courses, heroes, that type of thing. So it's the bit that is very easy to see. And a lot of companies do this very well. They've got a policy and they've got a procedure. Whether it's used or not is maybe something a little bit different. So there's quite a lot in there with regards to the layers. The next layer, if we can, sorry, stay on this one, I'll move on. The second layer is about their actual beliefs. About things that maybe aren't said, not so much slogans, it's about actually what the building does. It's often developed initially by the actual owner or leader of the business, and it's the way they do things. It's based on values. It's about having values, not just saying you've got them, but actually having them, and making sure that you've got the background policies, procedures, and things that are actually implemented, not just written down. That's the second layer. And then the third layer is difficult to quantify, probably the hardest. It's just the way it is. It's the things that people do because why wouldn't they? Or the things that people don't do because why on earth would we do that? It's about taking it for granted. It's about this is the way we do it. And quite often you'll hear the term in food safety and when people are talking about any culture, about the way we do things around here. It's probably more than that, but it's about this embedding it into your assumptions that of course will produce safe food. That's part of our business. Okay, so difficult to quantify. If we go back to the first layer, quite a lot of businesses do this, but have they got a false sense of security was what I wanted to do. Some of the things that, or mention, some of the things that people say, we've always done it that way. It's been said that that's one of the most dangerous phrases in any language is we've always done it that way, because it means that you perhaps can't change. It's often linked to innovation, but with food safety, maybe people don't quite understand why that happens. So you need to look closer. And if it is good, you've always done it that way and it's okay, then great, carry on. But why is it good? Learn from why it's good, not just sit there and learn from what happens. And if it's not good, then you might want to change. Okay, we've got a procedure for that. We've had it for 10 years. Things have always been all right. Doesn't always work. If we move on to the next slide, though, this is an example of a culture that's perhaps held up a little bit. This was in my area. I don't know whether you heard of it. It was about curry leaves. We had a street spice festival in Newcastle. Really good, and I actually went. I didn't eat any curry leaves, fortunately, so I didn't get the salmonella. But it was a really good event. But there were over 400 people got food poisoning from salmonella. And after lots of investigation and lots of testing, it found out that it actually was salmonella in some raw curry leaves that caused the problem. And it was in chutneys, etc. Now, it was all over the news, and I was actually interested because Newcastle Council spread the word through some social media. So that was how I got interested in it to start with. But from there, later on I looked, and there on the website was from one of our local newspapers, and information that it couldn't possibly be from this. And I'll just read a couple of quotes out from this. The man, one of the big owners of a big Indian restaurant in Newcastle, had said, "I find this very hard to believe. I've been cooking with Indian spices for more than 30 years. Never once heard of curry leaves causing salmonella. In my view, it's absolutely impossible." So that was what one said. Then we had a TV chef who decided that he said, if they were contaminated, then surely there'd been a similar incidence in other parts of the country. I'm not a scientist, but it's my understanding that salmonella affects protein. How can it survive on a leaf? I often eat them raw. I don't think it's right, and there has to be another cause. So, but actually it was proved to be curry leaves. There was no question, scientifically, that's what caused the problem. The food vehicle was curry leaf. Might be unusual, but it's not impossible. And there's an example of maybe businesses that want to get it right, follow food hygiene law, but really can't quite move with the science as well. So there's an example of actually you need to keep abreast in order to keep your culture right as well. So some broad ideas of how a little business maybe can improve food safety culture. I think it's important. This is adapted from Chris Griffiths' model. And he says you need to set some standards and expectations. You need to communicate, commitment over time, provide consequences, and maintain and improve. And the plan, do, check, act model that's on there is obviously taken from HSG 65 and is commonly used anyway in business as how to keep a culture moving and how to move things along. So where's by making a start? Can we move, is it moved on to that one? I can't see it.
Yes, it has, yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I can't say, so it's difficult to know where we're up to. Look at your suppliers to start with. All right, if you're a business, how do people select them? How do they check that they're okay? What about that sort of thing? Don't just buy from the cheapest. That sort of sets your culture to start with, maybe. It may be that they're the cheapest, but are they also good quality as well? Then concentrate on your daily practices that people can do something about. I think it's very easy for us to say, oh, you need to change everything. But actually, let's just look at what we do and think about how daily things that can make things safer. Involve your staff, encourage people to find weakness, get rid of some of the, and I put it in inverted commas, stupid rules. You know, every business, whether it's a food business or Mark, you're no doubt working in a council. Every council will have some things that are just, they've been there forever. Do we need them? I used to work in council. Do we need them? So that type of thing, do we actually need to do them? Encourage people to actually find the weaknesses in the business. How can we kill somebody? Actually, you know, or poison someone. We don't want to kill anyone. But then you can, by doing that, you can then find out how you can stop it. So what's the most likely way of doing it? Share information and make it easier to get it right than wrong. So little things like putting fridges in the right places, having knives, the right knives in the right area, the right equipment in the right area. So it's much easier to get it right than it is to pick up the wrong one. And cause food poisoning that way through cross-contamination. So I've recently started to read a book called Kill the Business, it's called, or Kill the Company, sorry, and it's by a lady called Lisa Bedell, and she looks at some of this and how people need to just start small, not necessarily start with the big things. So if we go on to the next slide, as well as starting small and looking at changing the culture that way, include all your staff. So think about how to do it. Competitions and initiatives, generate some information, generate a little bit of interest in it. We're very good at generating sales, very good at generating how we can sell more, how we can produce it quicker, especially in food manufacturing maybe. Not necessarily as good as how we can make it safer, and whether the two necessarily go in hand. So get some competitions and initiatives going. Train people. Look at your specific problems though. Don't just, it's not necessarily just the general food safety training. Everyone can do that. How many times have people been on a course, come back, that's it, you've done your training for another 3 years, end of it. We need to really focus on what can we do, how can that be applied into our business. Give people enough information to provide a reason and make sure it's sensible and justified, not just simplistic. Awareness raising, other ways of doing it, posters, we've already mentioned competitions, but also checks, internal audits. The other week I went out on an audit in the food business and there was some rework going on, and I just said, it was an internal audit that they asked me to do, and I said, so you're not putting any covers on the rework? Oh, we're still doing that, was what the answer was. Well, yeah, nobody told you to stop, was what the manager said. But in fairness, was that the staff's fault or the manager's fault for nobody making it important enough to put the cover back on? For nobody actually picking them up on it? They've been slow on production, I'm sure that would have been picked up on. So little things like that to make sure that people know that things are important. That's what audit does for you. And clear communication as well, so that people know who to talk to when there is a problem. So, moving on to the next slide with some specific ideas. Grab attention, and we've already said this, but some specific ways of doing it. Find out, have a competition. How could we poison or harm a customer? We don't actually want them to do it. We want them to say, find out in the business the easiest way to do it, because then we can rectify that problem. That's about building the culture. How might we get prosecuted if somebody came and saw us? So actually, you know, if an inspector came today, what would we like to have a problem with? Get people to think, and then identify what needs changing and how that can be done. So that's one. Rewrite your recipes. Real practical thing. You could do with doing that with some people anyway now for allergen control. So it's an ideal time. You don't have to do lots, but just building little bits to input in a particular food safety message. Actually, you know, make sure you put in things like wash this or rinse this or cook to a certain temperature, and make sure that's all totally involved in there. So food safety is within your processes, not just a separate thing. Tell them if they've got to take a temperature or if they need to chill it within a certain time. Put that into a recipe or a procedure for doing something. To encourage your staff to challenge each other and management regarding food safety issues. So if they see something, report it. Tell each other you're not doing that right, with a no-blame culture, hopefully. And maybe nominate people or small working groups to find out more about a specific problem. You might want to use some of the things that you've identified as the best way of poisoning someone, and get them to identify potential improvements and then listen to them. You know, you as a business, you need to listen to them once ideas have come up. Make sure you brief people regularly. Say how you're doing. Say what the problems are. Ask people how they can mend it. Make sure it's plan ahead. Short sessions, and maybe include things like hand wash. If you're having a problem with people not washing their hands, have a short session on hand wash. Maybe plan them so that they're rotational. Dress code so that we're looking 2 or 3 times a year because people forget instead of just once every 3 years on the training. Short, sharp shocks as well as the general training. As a business, you need to keep abreast of what's going on as well. Actually, assisting about researching, benchmarking, and identifying problems in other industries. Did it happen to you? You know, find out what your competitors do. Everyone does it in sales, so why aren't we doing it with food safety? And communicate that information as well. Don't just keep it to the managers. Provide the resources. It sounds a really simple thing, but make sure there's enough uniforms for people to wear. What if they get dirty? Is there something else for them to wear? Have they got enough time to do the job? Are we asking them to clean but not giving them any time to clean? Have we got enough people maybe in a catering environment? Maybe it's lunchtime and it's hands-on and you actually physically people to serve things. It's not a matter of people having longer hours, it's more bodies sometimes. So actually thinking about having the resources. Is the hot water? Have you got a system of replenishing soap and hand towels at the hand wash basin? Do things like that happen? So think about little things like that as well. Get innovative as well. You know, nowadays a lot of people who are in food industry are looking at social media, on the Facebook, or on the phones, etc. Send some messages. Use the company internet. Television's going on screens in businesses. Get people to think a little bit. Maybe fake a problem and assess the people's reaction, so that it might just bring something home. We often have things like crisis management for financials, and aircrafts do it. So do it with food safety as well. We've got a food poisoning, what we're going to do. And make sure you value your staff. Lead by example and ensure all areas of business have a suitable culture. Do make sure you praise people, acknowledge good food safety ideas, and give credit for it as well. But also make reasonable demands. I think that's something that in the food industry traditionally is not particularly well paid, very hard work, and you sometimes make reasonable demands on people with regards to how much you can fit in. So looking at that sort of thing as well. We move on to the next slide. Obviously, still, if somebody's doing it wrong, they need to be told, so correct and observe people. But if you're going to do that, you actually need to make sure that people are actually doing it, they're explaining the consequences when people do things wrong, retrain them and you know, make sure that we re-explain, and if necessary, discipline if somebody really truly isn't interested. I think that's an important part as well. You need to make sure that as well as trying to create this positive culture with regard to food safety, part of that is actually showing that you're not going to accept standards that aren't good enough as well. So there is some of that involved in it as well. And lastly, measure and celebrate your achievements. When things do go right, or something has worked, or we have improved our food safety, or complaints have gone down, acknowledge that. You need to acknowledge your problems as well, but you know, charts, notices, tables, photographs, audit reports, all of those cause interest. More and more of the food manufacturers, partly because of BRC, and the requirements of the British Retail Consortium and selling into supermarkets, more and more of these people are doing this sort of thing, and it makes a big interest for the staff. They are getting involved. They are interested in making sure that their shift doesn't have any complaints and getting it right first time. So it does sort of work. So that's a quick overview and some specific ideas, and hopefully we'll have a chat about it now.
Okay, Jude, thanks very much for that. Who's going to start us off on the discussion?
First of all, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, we can hear you.
I won't show you the journey I've had to make that work.
I kept various frozen screens of you, David, but you're there back now normally.
I am here, and I've got a coffee, so I'm happy. Jude, excellent presentation, and as we had previously with Steve, a nice summary of all the work that people have done, including Chris and Green Street and the FSA and so on. And you wouldn't possibly...
I don't know whether you caught the beginning of the presentation, but we did reference those in right at the beginning to make sure that,
yeah.
you know...
Well, I recognised it all the way through, because we all know that this work is really difficult to argue against. It's actually very comprehensive. It's built on HSG, etc., and so on. I think the challenge is that this only works if you've got a business that wants to hear the message. And we all play in the businesses that are our worst, not that interested, but recognise they should do something about food safety. So to some extent, we're preaching to the converted. Everyone's got a real difficulty with the small business that doesn't even have food safety training or can afford a consultant. And I pity the regulator who wants to have a conversation about their food safety culture, and they think, you mean one of those plates with bacteria on?
I think I can absolutely sympathise, and really that's why I wanted to look at, you know, I work within manufacturing mainly, and they're getting better. A lot of the manufacturers are getting a lot better with thinking about culture and seeing proper business. Catering, I think, is a different kettle of fish. To a point, there are some great ones, I'm sure, but I think it's a different kettle of fish quite often with catering.
It is, and I think you need to understand what you and others have presented and have it right in your psyche, and then you've got to be very selective about how you switch the business on. So I think that what is offered as food safety culture, thank goodness it's not more complicated, but it's too complex to share all in one go with the business. And you have to pick the bits that switch the business on and lead them gradually into the idea.
And I think I agree with you. I think obviously you've got to assess first, which is why I tried to look at some specifics and just some little ideas that would help just start you off. It's not about, because it's great having these grandiose ideas about filling in forms and doing lots of tables and deciding where you stand, etc. But actually what we want is people, you know, we've all done it in business. I've done it in my business. Oh, we'll put this new policy or procedure in, or we'll do this a new way. Then an order comes in and it all gets forgotten. You know, and that's our business. So, you know, little things that can make a big difference, which I particularly like the kill the stupid ideas point that I picked up from, not from food safety culture, but get rid of things you don't need to do. I think we have layers and layers of things that we do for nothing.
That sounds like a good idea. I'm just interested to hear what you think, Mark, because you're not a caterer. So what?
Well, when I think about all this, you know, food safety culture, I mean, me and my wife have we also have a retail business, and we actually have where we have our business in a shopping centre, and we actually overlook a food business. And one of the things that I've noticed is that it's in a shopping centre, which, well, this food business is owned by an individual, and it's in a shopping centre. It's open for 76 hours a week. And it has to be open all those hours, and clearly this poor guy can't literally be there 76 hours a week and actually do the admin work for the business as well. And also what I do notice is that there are times, I mean the reality of this environment we're in is at times business is very slow, and I see the guy, he does appear to have a high turnover of staff, and many of the staff he has tends to be quite young. and then I sort of start to think, well, you've got all. It's great to have this idea about food culture, food safety culture, and it's something which is definitely needs to be there. But when I think about the challenges of instilling that culture into staff, when you've got a situation, you've got a high turnover of staff, some of the staff can be quite young, and many of them will have, what I personally notice, will have this attitude of, well, I work over here. That's what I do. That's someone else's work over there, and I'm paid to do this here. I guess. I mean, I suppose. What advice do you have for those small business owners who have got all this pressure on them just to stay afloat, and then their mates think, well, and you want to think about food safety culture as well? I mean, what advice do you actually have for those sort of businesses?
I think part of what we're trying to say is that. I don't really want them to think about food safety culture. I want the culture to be so that they are food safe aware from the beginning, to be honest. I don't think it's an add-on. I think it's part of the business. So that's, again, why you need to be looking at things like... I have every sympathy with small businesses. I am one. So maybe not food safety, but whatever sort of business with the culture. But it must be about getting it right, because then it surely brings you more in at the end of the day. So it's about trying the little things, and that's what I was trying to get across. It's the little things to just bring it in. So, when you're getting a new member of staff, spending that little bit of time to induct them properly and saying, look, this is what we do, this is the way it is, and if you forget, there's some information over there, and correcting and helping them through it. I think maybe the high turnover of staff possibly to do with the fact that they don't really know what the job is, potentially.
I think, Mark, we have a huge range of interventions beyond the documented stuff, because we've got to switch the business on, and this is where the public are really important. Because let's be honest, how many people who work in environmental health, or more particularly in food safety, which of us here are going to go out and offer our services free of charge to a business because we'd like to help them a better food safety culture? No, we're going to say, well, we're going to charge you for that, and they're going to say, I've not got the money. But the public could be quite good at this, and I think it's about embarrassment, and I think it's about complaints, and I think it's about switching people on by saying, hang on a minute, you've got a food business. You might work all the hours there are, but you're putting money in your pocket, and this is how big that risk is, either ship up or shape out. And I think that's what the regulators have to do, is to make people understand that it's a serious business, and then hope that the light switches on. But a good 30% of businesses are never going to have a food safety culture that we would recognise, and they're going to end up in trouble year on year on year. And I think it's about 10% that you can shift into wanting to be more food safety oriented, and the rest, they'll have to suffer the consequences.
I must admit, I agree with you to a point there, David. My answer sometimes when I hear of food businesses saying, well, we can't do that because we haven't got time, or we can't do that because it's too expensive, my view is, well, if you're going to go into the food industry, I'm really sorry, you're selling it to people, go and be a hairdresser. You might mess someone's hair up, but it's not going to kill them. I know that sounds a bit hard, but if you want to go to food, you've got to do it safely. There's no question, because it's people's lives at risk. People die. They're ill, but people do die as well, and it's it's not an industry to be taken lightly. You can't expect people to go and buy it and not eat. That is one side of it.
That's very true, Jude, and I think it's going to come into its own even more so with the allergen stuff that's coming out in December. I mean, we do actually supply, as trainers, quite a lot of stuff free. We all do blogs, we all do booklets, leaflets, fact sheets, and there are 4 of us giving our time here, totally free. We're not getting paid for it, we're not sponsored, and that is for people either to watch live or in the future. Incidentally, if there is anyone out there who's got any burning questions, we've not managed to work out how to do it properly, but if you can find some way of writing a question and stick it in, we will try and answer it. Okay? Sorry, right, who's next?
I think something else to sort of just look at with regards to culture, etc., is that it's good business sense. It truly is good business sense, because you technically, if your culture's right and you're getting it right first time and you've got all of that sort of thing going, then your reputation should improve and you've not got so much waste, etc., etc. I don't think we sort of passed that part in, but I think there's a bit about that as well. I think it's just the attitude of a company. You retain your staff, the whole works. So, you know, I think that matters as well.
I think the one thing when I'm doing food safety training, I try and get people this image that you never get a second chance to make a first impression. So when you're being inspected, whether that's by your customers looking through your door, or whether it's a formal intervention inspection from an environmental health person, then if they walk in and it looks right, then chances are it is right. It's when they walk in and it looks like a dog's dinner, that's when people go to town and you get, you know, probably people digging, looking for more stuff. But if it looks right, it's pristine, it's clean, the staff are doing what they should be doing, washing their hands, all the rest of it, then generally speaking, that should give you good grounding.
You see, I think there's an alternative model here, because I've done food safety inspections for nigh on 30 years. And before we had all the clever stuff, which I 100% go along with, we used to say you can go into a food business and within 20 seconds you can read where you are with the business, and you're usually not far wrong. You might have an hour's inspection to do, but within 20 seconds you can think, oh, it's one of those kind of businesses. Now, if we can get the regulators, the trainers, the consultants to agree that food safety culture can be clever as the work is done, but it boils down to 3 key things, and that when you run a food safety training course, you always hammer the 3 things, and so does a consultant, and so does a regulator, then we might get a bit of agreement. It might be dumbing the model down a bit, but it would be great if everybody in the food industry is sick of the fact they're being told it's got to look right, it's got to feel right, etc. I mean, I'm not sure what those things are, but I think it needs to be a shorter list than all the different angles that the, if you like, the research shows, which is all very proper, but it's not all practical.
I think it's very difficult as well, because I think food businesses, when you talk about culture, they say, well, how can I do it? Yeah. And it's very difficult to say it's not a one-off time, it's a feel. It's not a, oh, put your chopping board over here and put your fridge over there. It's a little bit more than that. And it's about the beliefs, which makes it even more difficult because it's not a tangible thing. So it's more difficult for businesses to understand. But I also think that maybe trainers, and to a point, dare I say it, people like the Food Standards Agency need to look at the information that they're giving out to food businesses with regards to practicalities. For example, the E. coli advice regarding scrubbing of fruit and vegetables, that's all very well, but you don't scrub a raspberry very well and still have a raspberry. So we've not given them another solution, and so food businesses just do nothing instead.
Okay.
So, you know, we have to think a bit more about that sort of thing as well, I think.
Okay. Mark, you any views on this?
Yeah, this is something, Judith, I just wanted to go back to something you mentioned during your presentation, and a great presentation it was, by the way.
Because that's too many slides in, but never mind.
You're speaking about, you went through this different categories of companies, which I think it came from the toolkit.
Yeah, the Food Standards, the Food Standards Agency toolkit. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I found the different sort of categories of companies interesting. I was hoping, and I was actually find it really interesting to know if there was any research done to sort of say what percentage of food businesses fall within the various different categories.
Right. It's fairly new. Is one of the things to do it, and at the moment the FSA are still encouraging inspectors to use it. I don't think it's a mandatory tool, although they're looking at it to be basing for the hygiene rating system. It's still, as far as I know, encouraging. People are being encouraged to use that tool. There's lots of other tools, so I don't think we've got any stats yet, is the answer, Mark, sorry.
Okay, that's a shame.
I don't think we're that far ahead with it. I'm not sure I want to be a calculative non-complier, though. I'm not sure how you tell a business that one. So, yes, you can be various ones, but that's obviously to do with assessing. And then what happens from there is the inspectors will then give advice to businesses on how to do it, but when you actually read that advice, it's still quite limited. As David says, it's quite generic. It's not got any specifics. So it's about trying to think of little things. I still believe it's, yes, 3 key messages, David, I think it's brilliant, but it's the little things, because people get a sense of achievement straight away then, and then build on it.
Yeah, small steps.
Just one last question as well. I mean, well, it's just observation, really, and I guess it really does come down to not just being a good business owner. It sounds like it's all about being a good manager. I think that tends to be the...
I think leader's the better word, maybe.
Yes.
I think maybe not even necessarily a manager. I think you just need to be a leader. Somebody who can lead somebody into it. And certainly Chris Griffiths would go for leaders. You'd need both leaders and managers in a business, is what he would say. So I think I think I agree with him. It's not every time I'd agree with him, but on this particular occasion, I think you know, as far as food safety culture, then I think he's right there. I think you need to be a leader.
Jude, can I just ask you, just to remind us where we can access the Culture Toolkit?
It's on the Food Standards Agency website, and if you put in Food FSA Toolkit, it should come straight up. I've accessed it, but I haven't got a link at the moment. But I can make sure we get one.
FSA Toolkit. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Right, we're about to an end, folks. I'd just like to thank Jude for the presentation, and Mark and David for joining in yet again. It's much appreciated. If anyone wants to see any of the previous videos, webinars that we've done, certainly there is a copy of these on my website, and my web address is, hang on, I'll write it down there somewhere. So, it's good night from me. David?
Good night. I'm sorry I was a bit hiccupy, but I got here eventually.
Okay. Judith?
Good night. Can I just ask Steve, have we got any plans for another one, the next one you're going to do?
Yes, we have. I think the next one, I think I'm going to probably be taking the lead on this one myself. It's Equal 157. I did a sort of a CIH regional conference, was it last year or the year before? And I'm using that as a base. But as I was thinking about putting this on, then the FSA announced their new guidance on E. coli, and I thought, well, it was also a good time to revisit that. Yeah. Certainly, I've asked David to think about something for later on in the year, and we're asking other professionals if they want to join us. More than happy to take people on board and take it from there. But yeah, the old ones are on the website. The new ones will be on the first Tuesday of every month at 7:30. There are plans to look about expanding this to doing a second one on health and safety issues, but I think this one, there's enough information to keep it okay for food safety. Mark, so good night from you as well. Thank you.
Good night from me as well.
Right. What I would ask is, if you all stop online when we've closed this broadcast, just a couple of things that I just want to feedback to you. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, folks. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Good night.